Hi, and welcome to another episode of Shane Plays Geek Talk. This episode, we're going to be talking with Stephen Chenault of Troll Lord Games, who is a previous guest at least a couple of times on the show, but it's been quite a while. Troll Lord Games, of course, publishes the Castles and Crusades tabletop role-playing game, among other things. And this episode just covers a really lot of ground in running a company, Steve's thoughts behind how to run the company, Castles and Crusades and its place in the tabletop RPG market, and does he consider it OSR? The impact of the internet and algorithms and all those things on retail aspect of the tabletop role-playing game company. And there's just a lot of stuff. We talk about Steve's favorite monster and how Troll Lord got its name, and there's actually quite a bit of comic book industry discussion, too. We kind of relate it to the retail part of tabletop games, and also Steve used to both own and manage comic book shops, so it's pretty interesting. And then finally, we have a tribute to David Middleton, the digital dungeon master, who we lost recently in November. If you listen to anything, obviously I'd like you to listen to the tribute to Dave Middleton, which happens towards the beginning, but the last 20 or 30 minutes of the episode goes into the principles of how Steve runs Troll Lord Games. And I think it's just a fascinating topic of interest, not only to tabletop role-playing game companies, but anybody who's running a business. So if anything, listen to that part of it. That was the impetus for the entire podcast, the reason we even got together in the first place. But anyway, I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening to Shane Plays Geek Talk.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes, I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Getting geeky in Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Geek Talk, a journey into the things we love. I'm your host, Shane Stacks. Thanks so much for listening. Always glad to have you. And returning this week, no stranger to the show, but it's been a while since he's been on. And I'm just glad to have him on because he's a fun guy. His company does a lot of really good stuff in the tabletop RPG space. So with no further ado, welcome me back to the show is Stephen, a.k.a. Steve Chenault, a.k.a. Troll Lord of Troll Lord Games. Steve, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, man. It's been too long.
It really has. So, I love the fact that one of the coolest tabletop RPG game companies is right here in Little Rock. So, and I've actually, had the pleasure of seeing the Troll Lord dens, the offices, where the magic happens. And, it's been nice. I've seen you in person sip a Dr. Pepper, Steve. So it's
in my office. Yes.
Yeah. Not everybody has had that pleasure. So that does, I always have an icebreaker question. You don't really need one, but here's the icebreaker question, Steve. Oh, and just so people know, Troll Lord Games, among other things, is probably the best known for Castles and Crusades, which we will talk about here in a little bit. But for your icebreaker question, how many Dr. Peppers have you had so far today?
I am actually on my first Dr. Pepper.
What?
Yeah, I
was. You say?
It's crazy. I was drinking 8 Dr. Peppers a day, and that was just too many. It was entirely too many.
Those are words I never thought I would hear you utter.
Well, it was getting to the point that you can't even taste the Dr. Pepper anymore.
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, wow.
Right. So this is my first for the day. What I try to do is I try not to have one until after lunch. Dr. Pepper's best after you've eaten something. When your stomach's kind of full. So you have a nice Dr. Pepper. So I eat lunch, and that's one reason I ate lunch early at 11 o'clock. And I'm pretty...
So that way you can have your Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, everything is geared so that I can have that Dr. Pepper.
Wow.
And if something interrupts my 11 o'clock lunch, if someone wants to eat later, I start getting a little bit irritable. It's lunchtime at 11.
Yeah, so I hear you.
My Dr. Pepper at 11:05.
Yeah. Well, we're turning into grumpy old dudes. We have our not process. What's the word I'm looking for?
Routine.
Routine. I wanted to say ritual, but that was too strong. We have our routine, and it gives us comfort. So
and let me tell you, as chaotic as life can get, a routine is okay. It's
routine's good. Yeah,
yeah.
routine's good. It gives structure to life. So not that it's not, every now and then it's cool to get a wild hair and be a little spontaneous and maybe have a Dr. Pepper before lunch, but not every day. Not every day.
I do that occasionally.
You can do that at Christmas.
Yes. Holidays, you got to do that. Or if the workload gets so insane that, you got to take a break and do something.
Yeah, have a Dr. Pepper break. So, I actually tagged you on Facebook recently. Somebody, I don't know if they're mutual friends or not, but Brian Blevins, who used to own, the big game store in Jacksonville, was... he was right. He's trying to quit Dr. Pepper. So he was writing an ode to Dr. Pepper. And so I tagged you on that. So
I hear that the sugar-free Dr. Pepper is supposed to be as good as Dr. Pepper.
It's a lie.
Unlikely, lie. I will follow your truth in that, then, my friend. I won't take it.
No, it's just don't even. Yeah. Get what enjoyment in life you can, my friend.
Well, that's the thing. And as much as I enjoy Dr. Pepper, I'm not going to swap it out until a doctor tells me I got to quit.
Yeah, freaking sugar-free, whatever. Anyway, all right. So moving us on. We are going to talk today about Troll Lord games and Castles of Crusades, and want to touch a little bit on one of the things that I want to do with this discussion is I think that it's good to get, people want to get into the tabletop RPG industry or they're into tabletop RPGs and it's a passion. I think it's always good to understand a little bit of the business side and also what goes into a successful, even quote unquote, small company.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about that today. And specifically in early November, you put a State of the Union sort of update out for Troll Lord Games, the current state of affairs, which was just absolutely fascinating to the point that it prompted us talking about, hey, let's, it's been too long since you've been on anyway, but I'd love to talk about that.
Right.
But we can also just talk about in general, what's going on with Castles of Crusades and Troll Lord Games and all that. But I want to open this up on a somber note. This is the first podcast I think I've had since this happened. So it's a good time to mention it because I know you've highlighted it. And there was just before Thanksgiving, David Middleton, aka the Digital Dungeon Master, I think you knew mainly through his work with Fantasy Grounds, which Castles of Crusades has a presence on the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop. David passed away, I believe, just before Thanksgiving. I believe his sister had to make the social media announcements. And that one really kind of slapped me because, on and off over the years, I hung out with David virtually, and he was a really cool guy. So I just want to give him a shout out. The best way we can honor those who are gone is to remember them.
Absolutely.
David Middleton, I ran into him years ago. In fact, he was one of my first guests on this show.
Oh, really?
He came on towards the end of 2015, and I didn't start the show until June of 2015. So he came on very early in the show, and we would talk about dungeon mastering and, D&D and different games. And he was one of the first people like on Twitch and online really doing the digital dungeon master thing. He had a show on Twitch called Tabletopping. And then later he kind of rebranded to the Digital Dungeon Master. And he was a big fan of Fantasy Grounds to the point that he ended up working with Fantasy Grounds, in multiple roles, evangelist and customer support rep. And the president of Fantasy Grounds posted a really good tribute to David when he passed away. So I had seen that you kind of shared that. I didn't know if you interacted with him much personally or not, but he was a really cool, nice guy. And he genuinely loved tabletop role-playing games. So
I talked to Dave a little bit, mostly Chuck and Tim, chatted with him.
right.
Chuck's the one that let me know. And yeah, it's very tragic when this happens. And it's so,
Yeah.
it's out of the left field. You just
Right.
you don't expect it.
Yeah. Well, it was, and I'm sharing this because it was shared publicly. It was COVID related.
Yeah.
COVID is, people are taking COVID on different levels of seriousness. I'm not here to preach about that. And I just want to give him a shout out because he was out there doing this, hey, I'm going to run D&D, or I'm going to run, what's the Savage Worlds, or I'm going to run Castles of Crusades. He ran all kinds of games on his Twitch channel years before that became a big deal.
Right.
And he would do 24-hour marathons to help raise money for charity. And he was a cool guy. So I want to throw out some love to Dave Middleton, aka the Digital Dungeon Master. He was out there doing it. Not that it's the people that are doing stuff now are cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think a lot of times the early pioneers often get forgotten.
I think you're right. And someone like Dave kind of went out there, naked and brave because it's brand new. Nobody else is doing it. So you're kind of breaking that ground and breaking the trail.
Boy, he worked it like a bit. He was like 7 days a week. I mean, he worked it. Like I said, more than once he did 24-hour marathons. He stayed up 24 hours running games to raise money for charity. And he told me, I'm pretty sure he shared this publicly. He was so embarrassed. Like the first hour or two that he was online, he wore a bag on his head. He's like, I'm just going to be the guy with the bag on his head. But then he's like, and he took the bag off and just, but anyway, all right. So, just wanted to give some love to Dave Middleton, the Digital Dungeon Master. So let's not forget him. All right. So I have another icebreaker question for you.
All right.
Again, not that you need them, but these are always fun. Why do you love the Gibbering Mouther so much?
One of the things I like about monsters like that is there's no rhyme or reason. There's no consequence. You don't really have to build up any kind of story arc to it. It's just a monster of pure chaos and evil that attacks aggressively. And you can do so much with it on the battlefield, from, snaking tendrils of whatever, this way and that way. It's just unmitigated chaos. And I love it. I
love them too. They're great. Yeah. In fact,
it's cool.
I ran a Castles of Crusades module for a guy and his son, and I can't remember which one it was. I think it had green in the title, but it had a Gibbering Mouther in it. There was like a village that you had to kind of like work your way into, and the main evil threat was like in the city hall, and the basement was like a Gibbering Mouther or something like that.
Yeah, I think probably got green in the title. You're right.
yeah, you like the word green in the titles, but anyway, he actually, his son was like 13 and 14, and his dad was, my age or whatever. But his son, they both wanted to get into role-playing games. So it was one of the first role-playing games they ever sat down and played. And I ran them through that. And the Gibbering Mouther killed the son's character. And I was like, great. He's never going to want to play role-playing games again. And he was like, that was great. Because it slithered over him and consumed him or whatever. And he was like, that was amazing. So he loved the Gibbering Mouther too. So anyway.
It's just a great monster because there's, like I said, there's no consequence to it. It's just a monster.
Yeah. Well, it's got so much atmosphere you can do with it. It's gibbering, it's whispering, it's nasty, it's gross. Yeah, it oozes.
Trails.
Yeah.
It harks back to those people who are fans of Michael Moorcock's Elric and Corum, and that unmitigated chaos is just
weird. Yeah, just weirdness. Yeah. That's great. All right, so that's on the record. The Troll Lord loves the Gibbering Mouther. So why didn't you call it Gibbering Mouther games?
Do I?
GMG.
That would have been better. The Troll Lord. How did we even come up with that? The Troll Lord in our original big game, which we played from 1986 to like 2006. The enemy was this wizard, Trigol the Mage, later Nulok, that they called, because he was the Lord of Trolls, they called the Troll Lord in the game. And I think when we were having our first company meeting, we went over a whole bunch of different names, but we all settled on that because it kind of had this common root in the game table that we'd been playing forever. Though surprisingly, the Gibbering Mouther should have been there. That should have been the one.
Yeah. Well, I could see this first company meeting, and your brother Davis is a character. I could see Davis like leaping up on the table, astride the table, and proclaiming that it should be Davis Lord Games.
He gets rather enthusiastic occasionally.
How involved is he? Still fairly involved, or who's doing what with Troll Lord right now?
We've come full circle now. Davis, he left the company in like 2005. We do a little bit here and there after the Player's Handbook came out, and then he'd write an occasional adventure for us. But about 2 years ago, maybe 3, he's come back on full bore, and he's our primary writer at the moment. He's just rolling stuff out, working on a new game. So he's still with us. And Mac, of course, who the company was founded, for those who don't know, by myself, Mac Olin, and Davis, my brother David Chenault, back in 1999, debuted in 2000. And Mac and I are still very, very, very good friends. But he's got his own law stuff going on. So he's a consultant. I consult with Mac frequently on just about anything we do. Yeah,
I haven't met him personally. I mean, obviously the name comes up, but I haven't.
Yeah, Mac is he's very subdued, and Davis is enthusiastic, and I'm somewhere in the middle. So we make a nice, a nice mix of knuckleheads.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you need people that complement, but it can also thwart each other at times. So thwart's too strong of a word. Balance each other out. Yeah,
there you go. Balance. Yeah.
So, and how about? I can't believe he's the nicest guy in the world. I can't believe I forgot his name. Todd Gray. I was going to say Tim Gray, and I knew that wasn't right. What's he up to?
Todd still works part-time for the company. He takes care of all supply issues, the warehousing, all of that stuff. That's Todd's end of it. He occasionally will jump on and help design and write. Yeah. And he's actually an extraordinarily good game master, and he doesn't really like to write much, but he's got great ideas. So I'm always trying to, get into his headspace and get him to give me some good ideas, but he doesn't like to share. So, so he doesn't do as much creative content as I would like to see him do.
Yeah. Well, you could tell him for me, he's just such a nice guy. I always love him.
Super nice guy. I've known him forever and a day.
Yeah. Nice guy. And who's your man out there? Oh man,
we got Tim Burns is doing all of our web content sales, all of that stuff. That's all Tim Burns' side of things. And then Chuck Kumbo is doing, he does all of our VTT. We just redid the Fantasy Grounds stuff. Yeah. Chuck headed that up, and we're working on Roll20 and Foundry now, and all the various.
So yeah, that's smart. I mean, I love in-person tabletop gaming, but supporting products on the VTTs is very, very important. I mean, that's how during the pandemic, that's how our groups kept going. It's the younger people I've watched in the past few years. A lot of younger people have entered the hobby. Now, most of it through the D&D vehicle, but they are extraordinarily comfortable with, VTT stuff, Zoom meetings, whatever, playing over line. They don't have any issues with it. It's totally natural.
Yeah, and that's very cool. So it's definitely something that we want to make available.
No, that's smart. Yeah, and I think supporting obviously resources are limited. I've been, in situations it's like, well, why don't you do a Mac version of your software? It's like, well, because it takes an equal amount of resources, but only a certain percentage of the user base will use it. So it's not that we're against Mac. It's just that we have to, do our resources to where it's going to get the most benefit for the most people. So that's a very sloppy, quick analogy for saying that there may be times where your resources are limited. So you say, well, we're going to support the biggest VTT because that's where we're going to get the most bang. But if you can, I think supporting all the VTTs instead of, just one is the wisest course of action, because there's multiple reasons for that. But what's big now may not be big tomorrow.
Exactly. And as the market grows and more people get into it, everyone's going to find it's the same thing with social media. Right. You see different people on Twitter that are on Facebook, that are on TikTok, that are on Twitch. Everyone finds, where they're comfortable at. And interestingly enough, we're in a place in time in history where all of these platforms are available pretty cheaply, and you can find that. When you and I were kids, you basically went to the comic book store or Sears to get your books. That was pretty much it.
Walden, I think Walden Books was where I saw most of them. Or do you ever remember? We're both. Well, I know you grew up, I think, in Germany. I don't remember when you ended up in Central Arkansas, but there used to be a place in Jacksonville called Jack's Hobby Shop. Jacksonville, Arkansas.
I vaguely remember that. I think they went out just as I was moving down.
Well, their same building is now like a train, like model train.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. But that was like going to Jack's Hobby Shop. They had like all of the role playing. So you could Champion, space opera, stuff you wouldn't find at like Walden Books or, you know what I'm saying? It was like, it was like, but yeah, back in the day, access was different,
It's funny. I've I do a regular Twitch show on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4:30 to 5:30, and a lot of it's just jibber jabbering. But in the course of these conversations, I've come to realize a few things about myself, and I don't really think of myself as being particularly older because I still game. I feel the same way, all that stuff.
No, we're a different generation, bro.
When I was in kindergarten, I went to a one-room schoolhouse. That I remember. So when that came up in the conversation, that was just funny. And then I remember one of my favorite comic book stores was actually a store that a gentleman had in his carport basement. There was a basement underneath his carport. And when you went down in, there was lights hanging from the ceiling, and it was all kind of yellowish, the color, and just.
So was that early 80s?
That would have been 78.
Yeah, that's 70. When comic book stores were just like this really novel idea.
Yes. And it wasn't the collector's market hadn't begun. There was nothing. I mean, it was, you bought older comic books that were worth something, but the companies themselves weren't churning out stuff just for
the direct market didn't exist. It was, I still lament.
Yeah, me too.
I bang this drum a lot, on this show, but for discoverability, okay, the direct market has some advantages, okay, but for discoverability and getting people into the comic book hobby, nothing could beat every convenience store you walking into that having the Hey Kids comic.
Yep, grocery stores, everywhere.
So, and that's not just nostalgia. I mean, every kid had comic books because of that rack.
And it's interesting too. Yeah. The first comic book I bought was at a hardware store because it had a magazine rack. It's Green Lantern, Green Arrow.
Yeah, you get comic books at Kroger or Walmart. It was in the magazine rack.
I can tell you now, it's interesting being part of this direct marketing, company. We do a lot of direct marketing, but we've shifted because you're 100% right that exposure that you get in retail shops is far greater than you're getting even online. And the reason being, this was different just 5 years ago, but in the last few years, companies like Facebook and Twitter and Twitch and all of these others, their algorithms have gotten to the point that when you put something out, it's going to go to those people who are already kind of aware of it. You know what I mean? You're not getting as much as exposure as even online you were getting 5 years ago. The algorithms have gotten very, very
well. That's the holy grail of marketing is targeted ads. They've been working on that for years. They want that so bad. Yeah,
it's very interesting because we're seeing not as rapid a growth in our mailing list now as we were just a few years ago. And I think it's because we're not getting exposure to that many new people.
Interesting.
Now, the most recent release of Castles and Crusades has seen that turn around, but it's very interesting kind of fighting this algorithm, trying to figure out how to get outside of the footprint that you've already made, and bring your product to new people.
Well, I hear that a lot. I mean, when the internet first came along, I was like, this is amazing. I still love the internet. Okay. This isn't a rant against the internet. You and I have had the incredible privilege of watching the internet meet the public. Like, the internet's been around for a long time, but for public adoption was,
right,
I would argue, mid-90s is when it really started. And we've watched it hit and grow and change things, and it's been fantastic. I make my career's on the internet. That's where I make my money, really, is because of the internet, being either a web developer or software engineer, that kind of thing. But it does have some downsides, of course. And I hear, more and more of soulless algorithms having to force businesses to, like, I just read something earlier today about an entire initiative that's around getting people to draw called Inktober. And their whole thing is static drawings, but they're having to get on TikTok because the algorithms want short videos, right? So that for them to stay relevant, they have to make short videos, even though videos has nothing to do really with, but anyway, I guess you could argue that time-lapsed videos of people drawing is relevant, but yeah, these algorithms are definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah, without a doubt, it's very interesting. And like you said, we've watched it grow and change. We can get into TLG's sales reports for the past 20 years, and you can see. And I don't know exactly what year it is when people suddenly became very comfortable with buying online, because previous, and it's about 2006, 2007, maybe 2005. I don't know, somewhere around in there. Because you can look at like our direct to consumer sales are negligible. And then suddenly it seemed like overnight, everyone became very comfortable with it and began buying direct. And I think that was great for a little while. And it's still great, don't get me wrong. But that exposure that you're talking about that comic books used to get, because they were everywhere. You couldn't, as a kid, you went anywhere.
It was comic books.
And of course, in those days, it was a little bit more, your parents were a little bit more comfortable parking you in front of the comic book stand while they went and
right.
shot, so you could thumb through the whatever. And you pick these things up at 10 or 15 cents a pop. Man, do we sound old? Does that?
Yeah. Well, when I really started getting into comic books, they weren't 10 or 15 cents, but they were a lot cheaper than they are now. I'll put it that way.
Probably a quarter, I'm guessing, is when.
Yeah, they were. I really started going nuts on comic books about 83, 84. Okay, that's when my personal comic book. I mean, I read them before then, but when I shifted into rabid fan, was around then. Now, and this is a tangent that I'll try not to let grow too much, but you owned a comic book store at one point, didn't you?
I did. I owned a comic book store called All My Comics in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and then I managed one called Vintage Comics up in Springdale, Arkansas.
Yeah.
Both.
Now, how long did that last?
I owned the store for about 1 year, a little bit over a year. We discovered the guy who sold us the store. He took, and we didn't know. We didn't know enough, but he took, before he sold us the store, he took all of the valuable comic books, which is a lot of where your money is when something comes
right.
in.
The back. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. The back issues and stuff. And so we had a lot of comics that are just all worthless. And we held on for about a year before that went belly up. Mac and I were in that business together as well. And then years later, I managed vintage stock for about 2 years up in Springdale.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. That was a comic book, game, just about anything and everything store.
Well, I'll tell you, the past several years, I wouldn't want anything to do with running a comic book store because they just have all these issues with diamond and distribution and then also just political arguments have trickled into the fandom. It's always been there to a certain extent, but it's just, it's gotten to where being a comic book fan, in my opinion, is not as fun as it used to be, even though I'm still a big fan and I still buy comic books and read them. But yeah, back in the 80s or for a while in the 90s, I think owning or working in a comic book store would have been real fun.
It was fun. I have no regrets about either of those. It was just a lot. It was just cool.
That's cool. So how much like that knowledge you got on working with customers, how retail channels work, knowing how to display stuff to grab people's attention, how much of that rolled over into Troll Lord? To your
customer relations roll over a lot, and actually just the idea what carried over with me more so from vintage stock at all my comics. We didn't have any idea what we were doing. We kind of just did what the guy we bought the store from did. But at vintage stock, it was a little different. I learned kind of not only how things are displayed, but more importantly, how customers react to things, how people come into the comic book store and, how they react to this stand or how they react to other people there or, whatever's going on. So it was just kind of a general how to interact with this whole fandom. And when I say fandom of comic books, I'm kind of lumping all of it in there, from Star Wars, Star Trek, RPGs, all of it. It's comic books. This is this huge subculture that's best captured at Dragon Con. If you want to see it all together at once.
There's a Venn diagram where it all kinds of come together in the middle.
There's a lot of crossover. So, and at vintage stock, which was really cool because it had comics and games and console games and records, and vinyls, I guess vinyl we would say, and books, all kinds of stuff, that I got this really nice crossover, and just people. And I think a lot of that, the approach that I learned there carried over in my approach with Troll Lord games, and just at conventions and dealing with people online, whatever, trying to keep it fun, which is at the end of the day, at vintage stock and all my comics, Troll Lords, booths, wherever, people don't want to get into this hobby to get aggravated or to get they're trying to scratch an itch and have some fun and get some relief from real life. I mean, that's one of the things, and this is a whole nother discussion that I'm not going to open up in this particular discussion we're having. But for me, okay, let me put in quotes and underline, for me, comic books, role-playing games, related types of hobbies and activities, TV shows, whatever. I want escapism from real life. That's what I want. I want to have some fun. I want to check the real world at the door for a few hours and get away. I don't want everything to represent something from the real world. I don't want everything to have to be layers of gray and to reflect dynamics in the real world political and cultural landscape. I don't. I don't. And it goes for any subject. Generally speaking, if I'm watching, like one of my favorite movies is Reign of Fire. Yeah. All I need to know is that dragons have woken up and they're burning.
Right. They don't have to represent anything. Right. We don't have to understand the dragon. We don't have to analyze what the dragon may or may not represent and how does our reaction to the dragon represent us. And it sounds like them being dismissive. And I'm trying not to be, because there are people that use role-playing games for that kind of thing. And more seriously, more power to you. Yeah. But that's not why I'm here. So
here's one of the things, because I know exactly where you're coming from. One of the philosophies behind Castles and Crusades and the way we publish the RPG itself. So if you get into Castles and Crusades, you're not going to see any rules for, women and men play different or any of that stuff or any of it. There's fighters, there's clerics, there's whatever. The races have specific abilities, but all of this stuff is malleable. You change the game however you want it. Once you've picked that game up, if you want it to have, if you want to get on Twitch and use Castles and Crusades as a vehicle to, express whatever philosophy you have, fantastic.
Right.
That's what the game is there for. I welcome it, whatever. It's great. For me, I prefer just to get in there and kill orcs and move on. That's one of the reasons we're very specific with CNC. I don't want any of that stuff to trickle in there from the publisher standpoint. From the publishers,
Right.
I'm just making a game. You take that game and do whatever you want.
And if a group wants to do a multi-layered analysis, that's fine. I'm really not down on that.
Yeah.
What I don't like is when people say, if you play a certain style, then you're somehow wrong. And and by the way, you're a terrible person for not having changed your way in 40 years. And I'm like, well, no, let's don't go there. But anyway, that's a discussion. That wasn't why I'm wanting to talk today. It was just something that kind of came up spontaneously. I'm here for fun. I think I was keying off. You said people don't want to get aggravated when they get into the hobby, right? So, I'm here for fun, right? I'm here for fun.
I mean, that's what all of it is. You watch. I just rewatched the Avengers. What is the war? The 2 war movies.
Well, there's Infinity War and then Endgame.
Picks up the hammer. And it's just badass,
Yeah, everybody cheers. Yeah, one of the greatest moments in modern cinema history. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just yeah. Entertain me. Tell a good story.
Yep.
I'm not watching a documentary. I want to be entertained. And amusement. Well, I'm getting deep here now, so I apologize in advance. But the literal definition of amusement means without thinking. Muse. Okay?
Interesting. I did not know
If you
that.
break it like it means without, I'm not thinking, I'm just relaxing, so amusements literally means like just turn your brain off and relax for a little bit.
One of my favorite expressions is thinking is way overrated.
It can be. Yeah. You got to know when to think. And it's almost like the gambler, know when to hold them, when to fold them, know when to think and when not to. So, but anyway, all right, I'm going to reel this tangent back in. Boy, I'm still pondering the amusement thing. If people understand what I'm talking about, as the preceding thing to a word means without in the etymology, and I'm not trying to make this about religion. It's just the immediate example that comes to my mind. Atheist is theist, right? So theist is somebody who believes in a divine power. An atheist doesn't. So it's the same thing with amusement. Amuse. Muse is thinking or to be inspired or whatever. So there you go.
There we have learned something today.
We have learned something today. So anyway, all right. So kind of taking it back to relating your comic book store experience to Troll Lord Games. What was it helpful to see? Because a lot of people don't realize when they walk into a store, the amount of channel activity and marketing that had to get those products into the store. Right. There's distribution channels. You got to make stuff. You got to get it into the channel. You got to get it to the store. You got to da-da-da-da. So did having a knowledge of that help when you started Troll Lord, to knowing that, there's a retail channel concept here?
When we started, Mac Golden, he handled that end of things. He handled the distribution. He left the company in 2002 or 2003, somewhere around in there. And I took over distribution. So I was aware of what was going on, but Mac pretty much did all of that. What working at those stores did, however, do for me in a tremendous way is make me sympathetic to the retailer's plight, to know how much, just SKUs that they have to keep in their heads. They got to track and they got to sell and move and all of this stuff and how to display it and when to display it. I remember sometime in the mid-aughts, I was at, I think, Origins. I don't know where I was, at some convention, and this game company had just released this really cool game. But the game box was a pyramid, a literal pyramid. And I remember the first thing I saw when I saw them kind of haphazardly stacked on their table, the very first thing I thought, The retailers don't have shelving for that. There's
Right.
no
Yeah. Right.
shelf for that. You've created a cool concept, but nobody can display it. And those are the things that I became aware of in the retail shop. I mean, you have your glass case up front, comic racks and book racks, and there's not a lot beyond, unless you're getting specialty racks. And a lot of retailers can't afford to get specialty racks. So it made me aware when we're producing stuff of what the retailer is up against on their end. So that was kind of a takeaway from that for me.
And that's an important concept. I mean, if you've got the coolest pyramid-shaped box in the world, but you can't set it out, I mean,
yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah.
And this is before direct online is such a huge thing. So it's a real problem. When we first started about, I don't know, it was like 93, I'd have to pull the reports, but it's like 93% of our business was through distribution and retail. Now it's completely flipped. That is,
that's actually pretty high for when was that? When was it that high?
In the year 2000 through about 2004. Now you can see it starting in 03, 04, it begins to shift to direct retail and then direct to consumers. And by 2008, the shift starts becoming extraordinary. And in 2010, it's flipped completely on its head.
For industries like tabletop RPGs, I mean, stuff like crowdfunding, Kickstarter, Indiegogo is just really a godsend. I mean, it still doesn't solve that issue of people randomly walking by a shelf and seeing your product, right? But I mean, and I'm assuming a lot here based on what other publishers have told me. I think you've shared with me before that Kickstarter has been good, but I mean, would you say that it's a godsend, or where are you at with crowdfunding?
Yeah, the nice thing about what Kickstarter did, its timing was very good. When D20, 3.5 D20 collapsed in 04, 05, somewhere around in there, 06, something around in there, the market took a horrific beating. And what so many retailers had ordered stuff and so many distributors had ordered stuff.
So I want to hold on. Sorry about it. So basically at that time and still now to a point, as goes D&D, so goes the industry. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah. Let me give you kind of how that works. So when that market collapsed and all of these companies had all of this Dungeons and Dragons, this D20 material that they could not sell. I remember talking to one distributor. He filled 3 dumpsters, long dumpsters with D&D books because he couldn't move them. So suddenly you've got a retail shop, and this is what we experienced in 06, 07, 08. You've got a retail shop that maybe 10% of their revenue is from role-playing games. And of that, 80% of their revenue is from Dungeons and Dragons. So when D&D collapsed, and it didn't recover with 4th edition, when D&D collapsed, you've got to put money into something that's going to be like 1 or 2% of your overall sales, to pick up smaller publishers. So they quit.
Yeah. So of course, it only makes, people are like, oh man, that's uncool, but it only makes economic sense if you're trying to put food on the table.
What's his profit going to be over $50, $100? It's not worth the time and effort. So we saw a general collapse all up and down. Now, there was this rough couple of years that Gary Gygax's name got us through because we were still selling Gygax in those days. But Kickstarter comes along not long after that, about 08, I think, 09, something like that. And the first people who used it did not do it terribly effectively. But once companies became comfortable with it and customers started becoming comfortable with it, Kickstarter rapidly replaced what we had known for years as the distribution system, whereby you would send in a ad copy, covers, some art, your MSRP, and the distributors would order it, and then you'd base your print run off of that. Well, when the D&D stuff collapsed, the distributors weren't ordering any RPGs or bare bones RPGs. So we had no way to know what would sell or how it would sell or what you should print. The very first printing of Castles and Crusades, our opening distributor orders were 150 copies. Now, I cajoled him into.
So was that the little box when you did the box set?
This was the first printing hardcover book.
Okay.
And you can't, in this industry, you can't print 500 copies of something and sell it through distribution. It's going to get, a 55.
Yeah, there's economies of scale if you're using.
Absolutely. And
your
cost is going to be more than you're making. So that was untenable. But that's where we were. And then by 8, 9, something like that, whenever it is, Kickstarter wanders in suddenly. And I know this was nobody's intent, but this is the way it's turned out. Kickstarter completely replaced that distribution model where suddenly you could be guaranteed 30, 60, 400, 500, whatever it is, sales. And then you could justify a large print run, which get your cost all the way down so that you could actually afford to stay in business. And it took TLG maybe 3 or 4 years to work that model. And it was a rough time between about 08 and maybe 12, 13, somewhere around in there.
So if you don't mind me asking, there's a lot of questions I have coming out of this, but one of them, and if you don't mind me asking, feel free to dodge the question, but did you ever just say, did you come close to saying, forget it and just throw in the towel, or?
There's 3 times. The first time, this would have been when the market was collapsing in 05. We had just sent the Book of Familiars to press. I had a lot ordered. All of the pre-orders vanished, so we were going to have a huge print bill with nothing. And a very, very good friend of mine, TLG was extraordinarily short of cash, and a good friend of mine, Aldo Giazzi, who at the time he ran Impressions, I gave him a call and said, dude, I'm out unless I can get $5,000, and he sent me $5,000 without even a hesitation. So that salvaged the company. So kudos to Mr. Giazzi there. And then when Gary died, I couldn't quite figure out, because at that point, CNC was not doing well. It was doing okay. But, and once Gary died, I kind of lost my, desire to do it, because working with him was a lot of fun.
I can only imagine. Yeah. In fact, one of these days, I'd love to sit down with you and record an interview just on your memories of Gary. But anyway, keep going. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, and then the third time was when it had gotten so just dismal before pre-Kickstarter, after distribution collapse. It was just, and we'd lost the Gygax properties when Miss Gygax, pulled the licenses on those.
Right.
So it was a rough. A few times I've almost said, what am I doing here?
Yeah, any business that's gone for any amount of time has probably had those moments. So, but is it fair to say that now you're like, this is good. This is what, I mean, do you feel like that? Okay. Yeah. You're cooking with grease.
Yes, very much so. We've had a really, in the last, what is this, 2022, probably since about 2017. I'd have to look at the books, but it's been a good long time now. We've seen a good solid trajectory of growth. And in the last 2 years, it's just really popped.
That's something that I'm pleased to hear, because I figured the pandemic was going to kill a huge percentage of the tabletop role-playing game industry. But that's not what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think it actually did the opposite. I think so many people were put at home. And this is where I could be wrong on this, but in the last couple of years, we've seen this explosion amongst young people, in general. And I think it's because they're stuck at home. I had 2 kids in college, both had to come home. And what do you do?
Yeah.
What the heck?
Yeah, what are you gonna do? Yeah,
I think you saw a lot of people enter the hobby, and which is really cool. On the gender demographics, I think we saw a huge number of women coming into the hobby in the last 3 or 4 years, which is fantastic. I mean, it's like a breath of fresh air, just a whole new group of people have discovered the hobby. Well,
there's been a huge there's been a lot of different factors that have come together to tabletop role playing is just in a renaissance that's probably stronger than it ever was whenever it was big back in the 80s.
Probably.
There's a lot of things that came together. I don't watch Critical Role, but I've got to give them props for increasing the scope and awareness of the hobby.
Yeah.
Of course, D&D, Wizards of the Coast, I got to give them credit for releasing a very strong edition in 5th edition. It's a very popular edition. And you could even give credit to stuff like The Big Bang Theory, that geeky show, for, making it cool to be a geek and do geeky things. There's a lot. What I'm saying, I'm only mentioning a few of the many factors that have come together. Yeah, I think everything was perfectly placed. So maybe when the pandemic hit, that was where people naturally turned.
I think that had a lot to do with it. And I also think that, so if you take people in our age bracket, we were born back in the 60s and the 70s, and we began gaming in the 70s and the 80s. and it was still kind of this outlying thing, right?
Big time, yeah.
People played Monopoly and they played whatever other games there are. I can't remember any of them, but they played whatever. But we played RPGs, and it's kind of this outlying thing. And it doesn't ever really change until video games become a thing. And video games, of course, start getting real popular in the 90s. But by the aughts or 05 or 06 or whatever, there's everybody's playing video games. Men, women, children, especially this younger generation of Zoomers. Now, I've looked at the studies. The females tend to play, I think it was for the most part, phone games or something. I can't remember what it is. And guys played console games or whatever, but none of that matters when it comes to RPGs, because an RPG is neither of those things. It's a creative outlet that can have as much violence in it as you want, or it can have as much role-playing in it as you want. You can take the RPG and tailor it to whatever type of game you play. So I think whether you were a phone player, a console player, a PC player, whatever kind of video game you played, role-playing games offer you a perfect outlet. And one of the things I discovered watching my kids and nephews grow up in the 2000s is that they play games, any kind of game, all the time. They love to game. So I think to transition over to RPGs was very, very natural. And in fact, I think that they shifted from the video game to the RPG to the tabletop far easier and quicker than people our age would have when we left RPGs and say we started playing Doom or Duke Nukem or whatever, to shift back to the tabletop. I think that for younger people, it's just another game. There's nothing special about board games.
Right. It's the cultural perception of what an RPG is, what D&D is, what those funny dice are, is completely different.
Yep.
So which is both good and bad. It's good because more people are playing. For me, as an old school player, it's sad because it's lost some of that mystique. You know?
But I can see that. I think it's great because I love to watch. I don't know. I'm on TikTok now. We got Troller Games on TikTok about a year ago, 8 months ago.
Yeah.
And I thoroughly enjoy watching these younger people.
Yeah, no, it's overall, in the great scheme of things, it's more of a win than it is a loss. Yeah.
They are going through the same conversations that you and I did back in the 80s as they're trying to figure out, I remember this, what was it, a few months ago, I guess Wizards of the Coast changed the way that you can play orcs. You can have good orcs or whatever, and that's great.
Right. Yeah, they're not by default.
Yeah,
either.
whatever.
Right.
Yeah, which is just funny to me because, and I know it caused a stir on the internet, orcs, whatever. But I remember having these conversations at the table back in the 80s. I remember killing a troll way back when, and it's the troll's mate rushed in to save a piece of the troll's body and took it away, and
so that it would regenerate.
And we found out later, of course, that they're just an old married couple.
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's the thing. Once you take it away from a two-dimensional dungeon crawler, that's what I'm saying. It is a legitimate way to play to add layers of complexity to it. What I'm saying is, like, that's not necessarily why I'm there, right? But
exactly. But the funny thing about that conversation, the way that ended, it was hysterical because several of the players at the table, and this is exactly what we're talking about, several of the players at the table didn't want to pursue the trolls. And there was this long debate as to whether the trolls are evil or whatever. And finally, quite humorously, I wasn't running the game. Davis was. I picked up the monster book and I said, look, they're evil. It says it right here.
Right.
It was real.
Rules lawyer. No, I'm just joking with you. So here's my thing on it. I think I've shared this on the show before, but as long as it's coming up, I'll share it again. I have no problem with a setting that says a race isn't inherently evil or inherently good. Okay, like elves the high elf doesn't have to necessarily be good. I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. At the same time, I'm totally okay with a setting that says, due to fantastical cosmological forces in this fantasy setting, that race is inherently good or bad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm fine with either. But there's a lot of discussion as if, well, like, if you don't say that it's more open-ended, that you're like closed-minded and stuck in the past. And I object to that approach.
Yeah, I do. If you look at the world of Erd, orcs in the world of Erd are evil. And when you read the mythology behind them, they're evil. There's not
Right.
any good orcs. If you took Erd and made some good orcs, I don't give a shit.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, it's fine however you want to play, but there's sometimes in the discussion, it's like, oh, well, that's from 30 years ago, so they were wrong, and they didn't know as much as we do now, and they're not enlightened. And that, I'm like, come on, that's
Well,
life,
this is one of my favorite stories. When I was in college back in the 80s, whatever, Todd and I would go to this restaurant called Wyatt's in the mall. And you would always, it was just in those
Wyatt's Cafeteria.
Wyatt's Cafeteria. In those days, the whole mall walking thing had just kind of become this huge thing. So you would see all of these elderly women kind of walking, and then their husbands or better halves or whatever would be sitting at these benches just waiting. And I remember commenting to Todd, I remember this very vividly, because I was facing the window where I could see 5 or 6 of these guys, and Todd's just eating away. And I said, what are those? Those guys aren't saying anything. They're just sitting there for like an hour. They haven't said a word. And I never really understood it until now that I'm in my 50s, I understand it, because now they were just older people that know that no matter what they say, someone's going to disagree with them. So what's the point?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you do get more comfortable. It's like, look, I'm not trying to be contrary,
Right?
But this is how I am, and I'm not looking to have a fight all the time. But at the same time, I don't agree with you, And but the thing is, I think that gets lost on the other side. I do try to see both sides. Is that the people that are saying no, we should treat races more complex and with more layers of complexity to that? They have very valid reasoning. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. I'm down with that. That's totally cool. Do it that way.
And that again, that brings us back to this idea that role-playing games, and I think this is what younger people have embraced it the same way that we did when we were younger, is because there's no restrictions, right? If you pick up the Castles and Crusades monster book, whatever, and it says an orc is evil, you don't have to do that.
You can just strike it out. Yeah.
And you move on. The what is that? The world is your oyster. What is that saying? The oyster, something about an oyster. I don't know.
Yeah, there is a world being an oyster. Yeah, the world is your oyster. But in Castles of Crusades, it's a dire oyster.
Yes, there you go.
Eat you. No, but so, I mean, here's, the more I play role-playing games and I've gotten into a little bit of design, I was part of the design team for Advanced 5th Edition. I don't know if you saw that out there coming from EM Publishing. I did it. I did a minor. What's that?
I did. That was very cool.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. And I basically Russ Morris from Ian World and all that. I've kind of gotten to know him over the past few years, and I said, hey, do you mind if I'm part of this project? Just because I want to see what it takes to do a role-playing game.
Yeah.
And so he was like, yes. And he let me come on board as what I term as a minor designer. That wasn't a title or anything. That's just what I call it. I did some work on some spells and some monsters and, what else? There was magic items. What was fascinating was to set in the Discord channels and to be a part of the emails and to see the tremendous amount of work that went in to putting this together.
Yeah.
And this is something that's based off of 5e. It's not even from scratch.
Right.
And my whole point is that the more I play role-playing games, the more I see them as an operating system that you can write your own software on.
Yes.
So you've got Castles of Crusades. You've got 4 or 5 people playing it, or 2 people playing it, or how many people are playing it. And you're basically a computer running this operating system.
Yep.
And you can modify the code however you want.
And that's a great way of putting it, actually. That's a fantastic. And it works beautiful for Castles and Crusades because that's how we design the game. If you take the player's handbook, which is where all the rules are tied up in the player's handbook, and we just released the 8th printing on that sucker. Everything you need to play is in that. The monster book is separate. The CKG is separate. All those other things are separate. But you take that player's handbook and the Siege engine, it gives you the basic, mechanic for resolving both combat and everything else, every other kind of thing that comes up, from convincing the bartender to give you more mead to swimming to whatever it is. So you take that mechanic, and this is what we encourage people to do. I encourage every time I'm doing any kind of talk anywhere, you take that mechanic and you build your own game off of it. You have fun however you want. Take the monster books. If you want to change all of the monsters, change them. If you want to take the Castle Keeper's Guide and use the skill system that we've provided in there, do it. Do it. You've got the classes, the races, the mechanics, the equipment. You can get started. Go and now have as much fun as you humanly can, because at the end of the day, that's what we want to do.
Right. Have fun. And that is my, a few years ago, I think I did a post and a podcast on how to be a good DM or GM and how to know if you are.
Oh, interesting.
And the number one thing is, are people having fun and are people coming back every week?
Right.
If so, you're a good DM, or you're a good CK, or you're a good GM. That's the number one quality indicator right there.
You are spot on. I see so many of these young people who post, I DM'd my first session. I'm really nervous how it went, blah, blah, blah. And every time, if I do comment, every time it's the same way. Do they want to play again? You did good.
Yep. You did good. That's the number one indicator. Yep. Are they coming back on their own without you having to kind of, you know what I mean? Like constantly, hey, if they're showing up every week on their own, they're having fun.
Yeah. Keep doing what you're doing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So not that it's totally fine I see a lot more discussion these days of GMing or CKing or DMing as a craft. Nothing wrong with looking at it that way. Refine your craft,
right?
Get better, whatever. But don't get so caught up in that you forget that everybody's there to have fun.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So nothing wrong with that. All right. Well, I want to kind of start moving us towards the final topic here. I did want to say that I wanted to give a shout out to Troll Lord and Castles and Crusades. These tribute covers you're doing on your new printings,
yes,
are fantastic. They all look good, but the Monsters and Treasures in particular looks amazing. And they're new art. They're their own art, but they're tributes to old school D&D art from the covers. But they look great.
Thanks for that. We did a tip of the hat. It's We've always kind of kept Castles and Crusades out of the OSR discussions and the old school revival or old school, whatever that stands for, and all of that stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that community. It's a great community. We talk to them all the time, but Castles and Crusades kind of predated all of that. It came out. And
you're seen as one of the first, but you're not necessarily part of the movement. Troll Lord does not get enough credit. You guys were the first or one of the first to jump out there on the OGL and really do something with it.
Yeah, we were the first. Definitely published out there in retail shops. No, we've kind of gotten forgotten and all of that, which is okay. That that's sort of our own fault, because we didn't. Once that movement began to really blossom, we didn't jump into it. We kept pushing forward, and it was a very deliberate move on my part, from running the companies, that I wanted Castles and Crusades to be its own vehicle. It's its own vehicle. This is what we're doing. These tribute covers is really the first time that I loosened to that philosophy up and said, we need to do a tip of the hat to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That's my favorite version of D&D. Do a tip of the hat to that, and to that community who supports Castles and Crusades and who has, in their own right, blossomed in a whole variety of different directions, which is great. So, I love those covers. I mean, those covers.
Oh, they look so good. I would put the cover to Monsters and Treasure up as a framed piece of art on my wall. It looks so good. So they all look good, but that's my favorite.
We will have that one up for sale on Noble Dwarf pretty soon. I have to say, I don't know which one I like the most. probably the Player's Handbook. I absolutely love that cover. But
they're all good. I mean, I just always loved the just so people know, the Monsters and Treasure. These are tributes to the first original artwork of the AD&D hardbacks. So like there's that classic monster manual art where it shows you the above ground and below ground.
Yeah.
With
all the monsters everywhere.
Right. And I've just always loved that art period. So to see an updated tribute to it just looks so good.
And Jason Walton did those, and he did a fantastic job on all three of them, but particularly on the MNT of making it very unique.
Yeah, they look great. I mean, they're obviously tributes, but they're not copies.
Right.
And they look fantastic. So what's going on with Castles of Crusades these days? And one of the things that I've noticed, especially in the past couple of years, but even, several years back when you and I would talk more frequently. And in fact, and I thank you very much for this, for a long time. You sponsored the Shane Plays when it was on the radio. And then you were starting to kind of explore online marketing and what should I do and this and that. But the past couple of years, you've really started pulling out the stops on having I'm on Reddit, I'm on Twitch, now you mentioned TikTok. How's all that? And I see more promotions. Hey, this week we're running this sale. I get a lot more. So how's all that going?
Well, it's going actually extraordinarily well. We've got this nice, in the last few years, CNC has been growing, TLG in general, but CNC has been growing. And in the last couple of years, we've seen this nice kind of explosion. And we've very purposely pushed out and trying to, because we got pretty good about focusing on one platform like Twitter for a little while to the deficit of the others. But about 9 months ago, I set up this kind of schedule for everybody to do so that we can push out on all the platforms.
Well, you've got to do that though, don't you? If you don't have a schedule, it won't.
Yeah.
You've got to schedule it. You got to be purposeful about it.
You have to, and you have to kind of breach out all of it. And then of course, Tim Burns and Chuck Cumbo both got in here and pushed Twitch really, really heavily. So we got me on Twitch twice a week pushing it. And all of that's been going well. We've seen this nice kind of response. We've even branched down on TikTok. Still trying to figure that one out. But and then once these tribute covers started coming out, and the first one that came out was a CKG back in I guess June or July or August of last year, we started getting a lot more feed. And when the Player's Handbook hit, when the Monster Book hit, just before the Player's Handbook hit, it kind of popped and exploded. So we've seen this. A nice big response everywhere. And we're finally, I think, as a company getting comfortable with these various platforms and not only how to use them, but how to interact with people over there. And that's always the big thing with social media. It's not so much, put out a post and advertise, but it's interacting with people. And you get comfortable interacting with people on this platform to the deficit of this one. So it's trying to figure that balance out, because just like most people out there, you find that social media platform that you like the best. I like Twitter. I like Facebook. I like TikTok, whatever it is. And you don't go to the others as much. Well, publishers, Trollord Games, we have that same issue. I try to figure out which one I like the best, and then I like this one the most, so I don't go to these others as much. Discord seems to be it. I enjoy Discord. I enjoy coming over and posting, but I don't think about it. It doesn't cross my mind. So I have this little. I put alarms on my computer to remind me to go to Discord because it's just not something I think about.
Well, I think that's a smarter approach because it's going to be another loose, sloppy analogy, but. When the web really started, I've been involved with the web, developer or even in business development or whatever, since the mid to late 90s. From hobbyist on the web to it's been a major part of my career.
So watching it grow completely.
Yeah, watching it grow and seeing it as, not just watching it grow from being the fun CB radio, worldwide right. CB radio to being like, how everything's done. You remember the days when you'd get an email and that was like a dopamine hit. You're like, oh, I got an email.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, I got an email. And I used to caution clients because they never listen to me, but I try to caution them anyway. Like when radio came along, it didn't destroy the newspaper. And when TV came along, it didn't destroy radio. And when the internet came along, it didn't destroy TV. What it does is it further fragments so that you have to hit multiple venues to reach everybody.
Right.
Right. So it's the same way. You can't just do Facebook.
Yep.
You can't just do Twitter. You've got to have if you're wanting to do it, if you're really wanting to reach the people out there, you've got to have a strategy to touch as many as your reresources will allow.
No, I think you're spot on. And that's a great analogy. If you don't mind, I'm going to use that in my next staff.
Go for it. No, go, please. Please. It's one of my personal soapboxes.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way of putting it too. And you're right. You've got to figure out how to reach out on all of these. And it can be challenging.
Well, I think that you hit the nail on the head. It's like you have to be purposeful, and you literally have to schedule it.
Yeah.
Like I need to go make this post, or I need to interact, So, and I don't really see, like, and this is just my perception, like Discord is like a good your existing community, but it's not really. I don't see it as the best venue for like attracting new customers. You know what I mean? But it's a great place to keep up with your existing community. Well, I'm glad. I've really been seeing the effort and the pay, that you've been doing, and so I'm glad to hear it's paying off. I think it's smart. I think that for Troll Lord Games and I think that you're probably ahead of the game compared to a lot of other similar sized.
Yeah, we hope.
Game companies. You're actually a publishing company. You're Chenault and Gray.
Yeah.
So you do more, but Troll Lord Games specifically does. What has Chenault and Gray been up to lately? I think the last thing I got from y'all was like a Tarzan book or something.
Yeah, we printed the 3 Tarzan and the first, the Princess of Mars, and then At the Earth's Core. And our next big project through Chenault and Gray, we did a Kickstarter on it last year, but it'll be the Robert E. Howard art.
Yeah, those are great. That stuff you do with Michael Tierney are just fantastic.
Yeah.
So really good.
Good stuff there. And then we've got a subsidiary, another company called Innsmeat Productions, and we're going to look into revisiting. If you remember, we did a few, I think 2.
You did the commercials, it was like The Walking Dead, but they were finding like Castles of Crusades stuff or something.
We're going to revisit that here, hopefully, very, very soon.
Yeah, those were smart. Yeah, where it was like it was post-apocalyptic wasteland, but they were finding like, we found a treasure, and it was like a bag of like Castles of Crusades books or something.
It was great. I love both of those things.
Yeah. Well, I hope that goes well. So back to Castles of Crusades, Troll Lord Games. I want to kind of wrap up. If you have any announcements for Castles of Crusades right now, please feel free to share them.
Well, let me just throw out, we've just released the 8th printing of the Player's Handbook. We've completely overhauled the look and design of the book, including a mountain of new art. We've got each of the classes has both male and female renditions of the class, fighter, barbarian, what have you. The book itself is just much easier to navigate now. It's been full color for a while, but it's just the layout's much, much better. So definitely check that out. You can download, that's the 8th printing. You can download the 7th printing for free on the website if you want to check the actual system out. And of course, we've got the Castle Keeper's Guide and the Monsters and Treasures with their new covers. And just
so I want to make sure people heard that. You can get a free copy of the Player's Handbook 7th edition.
Digital, a digital copy.
Digital.
Yes.
You can download it PDF from, was it trolllord.com?
Go to www.trolllord.com and head over to our store, type in Player's Handbook, and you'll find it. It should be.
Get a copy of it. Yeah. And one thing I have noticed, every time Troll Lord, like when you do a new printing of your core rule books, you don't change the edition.
No.
But they're not just, we're doing another run. Like sometimes they'll get different covers, or they'll get different layouts, or they'll be, it's not just, I'm just going to get another copy of the book I've already got.
Right. We try to improve it, both.
It's still same game.
Same game. The mechanics have not changed since our first printing in 2004. So if you've got a first, second, third, fourth printing, you can play just as easily with the eighth. Nothing's going to have changed. So, we've been very careful with that. And so long as I'm sitting at the helm, we don't intend to do a second edition or.
I was going to ask about that because, like, evidently for a long time, Pathfinder's hill they died on was there will never be a second edition, but then they did one. So so you're saying there's definitely
that's not going to be, and I can use two things to support why we have this philosophy. One is an article I read in Dragon Magazine by Gary Gygax way back when he talked about never making a second edition of Dungeons and Dragons because it would split your customer base. And now you've got first edition and second edition, and now you've got to either make two product lines or only support one, having lost X number percentage of your customers. And it's the exact same thing that you're talking about. With TV, with radio and TV and on down the line, you start splitting your customer base. And I don't want to do that. I want anyone who, if you've bought the Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook, you're still at the same table with the person who bought it 10 years ago, and we're all just gaming together. And the idea is to continually grow the community, which I think we've done a pretty good job of.
Well, I think and I'm completely shooting from the hip here. I'm not calling out any individual companies or editions. Okay, I'm shooting from the hip and talking philosophically. Having been a longtime tabletop RPG player and watched the industry and talked with fellow players, I'm not opposed to the idea of any game ever having a new edition. There better be a good reason beyond just we're not selling any copies of the new book, so let's arbitrarily change the mechanics and push out a new edition.
Right.
I understand you're a big business, not a small, but like a big business, a big company, big corporation, and you got to have revenue to feed the beast. And I've talked to hobby shop owners, and tabletop RPG games are. They can be a challenge revenue-wise because once the book is sold, it's sold. And, people share books and not everybody buys a copy of the book. So there's not a lot of recurring revenue from the core rule books, right? So, which I'm sure you're incredibly aware of. Then you go like, well, let's do a new edition. And they got to buy all new books. And if that's the reasoning, then I'm absolutely not okay with it. But if you're like, you know what, our first edition or second edition was fundamentally flawed and broken and we need to fix this, or else it's been 30 years since we've had an edition and the role-playing game community has innovated all these new mechanics we want to take advantage of.
Right.
I'm not against that. But if it's just to generate sales, that's, obviously I'm not for that.
Yeah, I think it's easy to kind of slip into that. The idea... I can't remember that. I can't remember any expressions apparently, but that concept of gaining one new customer, it's tough. It's tough to gain a new customer. You have to put a huge amount of resources into it.
Right.
But I
think you're talking about from a business perspective, it's cheaper to keep an existing customer than gain a new one. Yeah.
So that's the philosophy behind the editions is you can keep your customers because these guys are going to keep buying it over and over again. But really, I think that what you should be doing is trying to find a new market, a whole new crop of people to buy into this game. You can see what's happened to comic books as a perfect example of when it goes the other direction. That industry has slowly died. I mean, when you and I were
they've locked themselves into a vicious circle.
They have, and they're not ever trying to push their products. Keep getting more expensive. They look better. They appeal to the older guys who have been doing this buying this stuff forever, but young kids can't afford to get into it.
Right.
The reason that you could buy a comic book and if whatever it was, Action Comics issue 248 probably sold 150,000 copies because it cost 25 cents. So you could go to the candy store and pick it up with a quarter. You can't.
Well, they also used to allow returns. They don't do that.
True.
They stopped allowing. So the store owner
is out.
If whatever didn't sell, he would send back. Rip the cover off and send back.
Yeah. So I think that industry is a poster child of what happens when you don't try to get new people, jumping on to whatever it is that you're making. And I think that when RPG companies go down that same road, you start risking, you start getting, like you said, boxing yourself into a corner.
Well, that's what they've done. The direct market and the direct distribution model, to where instead of comics coming to you everywhere you went, you had to go to the comic book shop to buy them.
Right.
They started going into sort of a vicious whirlpool of, diminishing customer base.
Yep.
So, but like you said, I mean, some of the quality's gone up and there's, whatever, but I'd rather go back to the old days. And it's not just nostalgia. I'd like to see comics everywhere. But anyway,
I was very pleased to see, we've all watched over the past 3 or 4 years, cars become insanely expensive, right? To get a new car is crazy. I priced a truck last year and it was, for what I have now, I think it was like $58,000. I'm like, what? That's insane. But it was nice to see that Ford, now they had so many pre-orders on it, they had to shut the pre-order system down, but their $20,000 truck sold out instantly, and they've got this huge backlog of orders. Now, what that should
that's because they offered something at a price that
So if comic books would take a step back and kind of look at their roots, and RPGs, we're in the dangerous zone here too, because RPGs are getting ridiculously expensive. So you get into this zone where you've just got to be careful. And I think that making
$60 for a core rule book is not.
It's a lot. Totally, and even our player's handbook used to be $20 and it's up to $40 now because it's full color and all this other stuff. Even that to buy in, and it's one of the reasons we give the player's handbook 7th printing away for free. To buy in at $40 it's a stout price. Now, Tim and Chuck are going to yell at me for saying that publicly, but it's a stout price.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a double-edged discussion, and I guess the buy-in price can get expensive. Okay, by the time I buy all 3 core rule books for like D&D, CNC, whatever, I'm going to spend a little bit of money.
Yeah.
But then, really, I don't have to buy anything else to keep playing.
That's the key to the RPGs, and I think that's one of the coolest things about this hobby is you can pay $40 for the 8th printing of the Player's Handbook and have 50 years of joy, right?
Yeah, you could just keep going. I mean, now if you want, you can go buy modules, or you can buy accessories and da-da-da-da.
And
you don't have to. But you don't have to. No, not at all. I mean,
you're right. That is the big difference with RPGs. It's unlike any other, well, except maybe I guess board games, because once you buy it, but even that board game, once you've played it, you've kind of played it. But RPGs are different every time you open that book.
Right.
It is a very unique hobby.
All right. So speaking of, I want to lead us into this. Probably not going to spend quite as much time on it as I thought we originally might, just to, keep this discussion somewhat reasonable time-wise. In early November, you posted this, I think you sent it as an email, and you also put it on Facebook, Troll Lord Games, The Current State of Affairs.
Yeah.
Now, is this linked on the Troll Lord website or something? I'd like to put it as a link in the show notes. And yes, as a matter of fact, Steve did send me the link to the blog post in question. It's on trolldens.blogspot.com, which is basically his personal blog and a blog for Troll Lord Games, but I will put the link in the show notes. So go to shaneplays.com and look for this show, and it will be in the show notes. And again, the name of the post itself is Troll Lord Games, The Current State of Affairs, and it was originally posted November 3rd, 2021. I definitely recommend reading the blog post to go along with this discussion. And really, the reason I'm wanting to link it is so that people that are interested in this kind of thing can go read it. Because you went into enough detail, there's no way we can really go through the whole thing during this conversation.
Yeah, it's pretty long.
But for the tabletop RPG industry, and I would argue for a lot of other industries, there is a lot of good advice and wisdom in here on running a smaller company. Really, just a company in general, because a lot of these principles scale. So you basically said it was Troll Lord Games, Current State of Affairs. You posted it November 3rd, 2021. I read the whole thing, and I thought it was great. And you open it up, you say, I've read a great deal about catastrophic delays in the RPG and board game industry, all brought on by pandemic and the economic turmoil that it caused and are exacerbated. That's true because a lot of people depend on having their stuff manufactured in China.
Yes.
And I'm not here to say that it's good or bad. That's just how it is. China has positioned itself as the world's manufacturer. They've retooled their, people say, well, let's just start manufacturing everything in the U.S. again. It's like, well, we could, but we can't just flip a switch and make it happen because they've built all these factories. They've got them all retooled. They're set up. They position themselves purposefully to be attractive for manufacturing stuff. But then after it's manufactured, it's got to get on a boat or a plane or something and get to where it's going. And the pandemic has messed a lot of that up. And then China being like, well, we've got to shut this factory down because people are sick. Costs started going up. So the point is, due to a multitude of factors, things started getting delayed and more expensive in the tabletop RPG. Like, hey, we kickstarted for this much and it was supposed to be delivered on this date, but then the pandemic happened. So there was a lot of that going on. Okay, so you want to say there have been press releases explaining it, Kickstarter delays, conferences, and so forth. I felt it was high time to let you know how TLG, high time, Steve, let you all know how TLG has and is coping with this. So below is a long note to all those who have so generously supported TLG over these many years, Troll Lord Games, obviously, as well as the curious viewer to let you know where we stand and how it impacted us. You can read the short as desired, or the long as desired, or skip this and go watch the X-Files. And you said you'll try to refrain from discussing the mysterious crash of 47. It was just a weather balloon, Steve. Here's the thing on Roswell. I don't know what happened, but I can tell you one thing I'm absolutely convinced of. It wasn't a weather balloon. All right, moving on.
I actually just read. I just read a really good book that went over all of this stuff. It's very fascinating stuff.
Well, there's just too much weirdness for it to be an evidence.
There's a lot of weirdness.
Yeah. So something happened. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a weather balloon. Okay. Was that a double negative? It was not a weather balloon. Okay, the short. Here's the short. Troll Lord Games manufactures domestically. The pandemic has had almost no impact on our releases and caused Troll Lord Games no delays. We offer veteran discounts and programs and recycle about everything. Any delays and problems have nothing to do with the supply chain, pandemic, or any other cause. It lies squarely on my desk. Now, it lies squarely on the desk right next to your can of Dr. Pepper. Now, I know from talking to you over the years that you're not just suddenly saying this. You've clued me in on your philosophy for running Troll Lord Games, up to and including, I don't know if you still do, but for a while you had like an industrial class printer and you printed a lot of your stuff right there.
We still do our own stuff, yes.
And you purposefully have kept as much of the business, domestic as possible.
Yes.
Not only for business reasons, but also for, patriotic's not the right word, but like, why outsource if you don't have to? Keep the business here, right? Yeah. So now the long of it goes over a lot of stuff. I can't go through everything, but off your memory of writing this, before I try to pick out points, is there anything that you want to add to the long of it rather than the short of it?
Well, the long really kind of covers both the roll up of COVID, and I read the news a lot. I follow what's going on, so I could, as soon as it jumped into Korea, I could see something was going to happen. If this wasn't going to be, and this goes back into a philosophy I've had with TLG for a long time. There certainly are patriotic reasons that I produce stuff here in the United States. I'm a huge fan of helping out. I'm a huge environmentalist too. You should take care of your community first, and then your city, and then your state, and then your region, and then your country. No matter where you are in the world, that should be your primary concern, because that keeps everything cleaner, right? That's just a good way of doing business. It can definitely be a little bit more expensive, but one of the things I've always argued with other publishers about, debated, whatever the word would be, about using overseas printing. There are so many variables, overseas manufacturing. There are so many variables that go into delays that you have zero control over. We print in Missouri. If there was a trucking shortage, I could get into my pickup truck and drive up to Missouri with a trailer and bring all the books back, right? But if there's any kind of conflict, a pandemic, anything that happens overseas, you can't do that. Even if it's across borders into Canada or Mexico, you have zero control over any of that. And of course, that played out in a huge way when COVID hit. And the Chinese government began shutting down factories, even doing recalls. I remember they recalled some of their boats with medical supplies that were already en route to Western countries or whatever. So there was so many of these things kind of played into it. And that's been a personal philosophy and a TLG philosophy since the beginning. There's enough variables that I can't control. I don't want to add to that.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Printing domestically, just from a business standpoint, not only does it create strong ties with this business that I have up in Missouri, we've worked with these guys for 15 years so that when problems erupt, we can work through them because we've worked together for so many years. So you've got relationships that you can rely upon. You've got a control over the transportation that you don't have to worry about. Cost is going to be a little bit more, of course, but we factor those in. So you just kind of roll.
Yeah, and you also mentioned in this update that you're willing to sacrifice some profit to manufacture domestically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easy to justify to me too, because it's harder to justify when you're selling just through distribution and you're having to give 62% of your cost to the distributors. That's another discussion entirely, but Kickstarter changed that completely, right? We now have a huge number of people who are paying not quite the cover price, but damn near it. So we can eat a little bit of that with the assistance of the backers on Kickstarter and keep the business here. And it pays out all the way around, right? It helps other businesses, and nobody's had to wait for TLG books on trucks and ships or any of those delays. Any delay is going to be something that we caused internally because we didn't finish an art piece or, whatever. But I think that it's just, it works on so many levels. But we suffer a little bit of profit loss. There's no doubt.
But you're willing to, you believe enough in these principles that you're okay with that. And you're the one making the decision. You're not forcing that decision on your customers. You're making that decision, which is
we're not right. Yeah.
See, that's not again, but I just want to say I'm not here to get into a philosophical discussion of capitalism versus other forms of economic policies.
Right.
But that, everyone's like capitalism this, capitalism that. That's capitalism also gives you the choice to make less money. It's your choice to make less money to support your principles. And, so I think that's cool. You go through here to kind of reinforce what you're saying. Yeah, you say you use local suppliers for equipment parts, shipping boxes, paper, glue, printing paper, toner, and printer maintenance. We're the largest client for one of these companies and one of the largest for another. Both businesses suffered tremendously during the pandemic, largely because restaurants dropped off ordering menus, flyers, and posters. However, TLG's business remained steady and strong. Book printing in our own shop was up because of use. We ordered more supplied paper, etc. Or more supplies, paper, etc. This helped these businesses weather the storm. You did this through TLG. So I have to be careful here because I'm not knocking companies that use China.
No, everyone's got to make, it's like you said, freedom is a messy thing.
Right. And
if you feel like you're running your company and the best thing for you to do is manufacture overseas, then do it. That's the way freedom's messy. So,
but by you following these principles, and you go into detail even at more length about supporting local suppliers. You kind of go deeper than what you mentioned here. It's good to support local. It's, like I said, local, then county, state, local, right. Tri-state area kind of thing, and on and on and on. But, you mentioned here that you said at the beginning of the pandemic, Trollord Games used 5 local suppliers for our print shop and mailroom and several in adjoining states. 2 of those have not survived.
Yes. Very sad.
A third moved their operations from Little Rock to Memphis. So were you still not disrupted by the supply chain?
So when it jumped into Korea, I knew it was going to get here. Now I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I know, and I remember telling, and I'm not trying to sound like I know it all because I don't, but I remember telling everybody I knew, go buy toilet paper, light bulbs, and toothpaste because it's going to get dicey for a little while because people are going to panic as soon as there's an interruption. People panic. I don't know why they buy toilet paper, but they do. So just just make sure you have some on hand.
Right.
But for Troll Lord Games' purposes, I got a little bit nervous that I might have, and it's not so much. So when we order paper for our own print shop, we try to make certain that it's manufactured domestically, right? It's not coming from overseas anywhere. Now, sometimes it does. Sometimes our paper comes from Germany. But Germany and Finland. But for the vast majority, it comes from the United States. But I know even if you purchase materials domestically, what happens when people begin to, and I hate the word panic, that's not right. When people begin to react to situations and they no longer can order their stuff from overseas, they're going to order it domestically and pay the extra cost, which is going to cause all kinds of disruptions in domestic supply channels as well. It takes a few months for that to actually develop, but it's going to develop because if I order something from China normally and I can't get it, then I'm going to order it from Montana, right? Because that's where it is. That company in Montana is not going to have any idea that they're fixing to get 10 times the orders that they had 6 months ago. So they're going to have shortages. So I immediately began to buy and stock deep, getting a lot of paper, a lot of shipping boxes, lots of tape, lots of peanuts. We had stuff piled everywhere so that when the disruption hit, and it did hit, we weren't impacted by that at all. And now we did have a couple of slip ups. What I would do is when we'd start getting down is Todd would go in and order more. But I figured out that I can't even let myself get down much because the supply chain interruption was huge. And so for a very, very short period, we were out of 2-inch boxes. And for about 2 weeks, we almost ran out of paper for the print shop. But beyond that, we haven't had any shortages because I anticipated this kind of whiplash through the supply channels. And we've all seen it. And it's not so much that, there's a deficit of goods everywhere. It's just that the grocery stores or Target or Walmart, whoever, they've been ordering this particular way for a decade. Now they got to change everything. And when something is out, we have a perception that it's out, so we buy more. So now there's less, the whole 9 yards.
One of the reasons that our supply chain got messed up for a while and here's one thing I don't think gives enough credit. I'm assuming it's like this in other countries, but in America, we eventually recovered, adapted, and now for the most part, you can get what you want off the shelves again.
Yeah.
Because that's what business does. It adapts. But there was some there were some ripples for quite a while.
Right. And the whole thing on PLG's purpose during all of this was to not run out of stuff so that I can't, because if I can't make books, I can't, pay employees, right? So then it becomes a serious problem. Right.
And you go into length on this blog post about, hey, we make this percentage of money off stuff you buy, and here's where the money goes. It's a very transparent, none of this is to make you as rich as possible so that you can, smoke your cigars and light them with $100 bills. I mean, you're like, here's how we run the business. And a lot of it is just to keep people paid. But, kind of the point I was leading to with our shelves here in America is over the past, 20 years, probably longer, but that I've been aware of it, distribution has gone more and more to just-in-time inventory.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then you hear I don't know if it's true or not, I assume it is, that, most of your grocery stores are dependent on a truck coming every 2 or 3 days. That can go anywhere from there's only enough stuff in the store for 3 days, or it could go as much as like when you go to Walmart and you buy a candy bar, the distribution gets alerted that Walmart needs a candy bar on the next shipment so that it can replace that one single candy bar. That's called just-in-time inventory. And just-in-time inventory lets you run at the thinnest possible operating costs, right? Thin margin, and you don't get stuck with a lot of inventory, but you can be disrupted super easy if a wrinkle hits.
You can see that in the two grocery stores that I deal with here. I'm not going to name any names, but one is continually out of things, and the other one is never, not during the entire pandemic, has it been out of things.
Oh, wow.
So you can tell the way they,
their inventory model,
obviously operating differently.
Well, when you have the executives looking at a bottom line, just-in-time inventory looks great because it's like we only have exactly what we need to sell, but it assumes that everything's going to run perfect every day and that COVID doesn't exist. So
exactly.
What I'm saying,
they go somewhere else.
By doing these principles, you're like, hey, we do things domestically. I project, I do this. We only use environment. I mean, you go into real deep on environmentally friendly, like your packing peanuts are only from cornstarch. And if you use plastic bubble wrap, it's only because another shipper sent it to you. Everything that you receive in shipping, boxes and stuff, you reuse.
Yes.
And then you use local companies and What I'm saying is by following your own principles, and you'd even said to me before, we do everything locally. We try not to depend on uncertain supply chains. You were able to weather COVID like a champ.
It really didn't impact our, like I said, other than
I think your books got delayed. You went from 3 to 4 weeks to 5 to 7 weeks because of.
It was, yes, that would be one of the impacts that I didn't control. The printer that we print everything soft cover in house, and that I could control. But any hard covers we print out of house up in Missouri, and that has gone from an average of 3 to 4 week turnaround to about 5 to 6 week turnaround.
Right. Yeah, I wish I could go deeper and deeper, but really, if anybody's interested, I think these are wonderful principles. Like I said, larger businesses could benefit from them as well. But if you're a small business in America or really anywhere, I think there's some really good advice and wisdom in here for running your business because and I'm just using this because it's a good analogy, not because I'm trying to proselytize. There's the parable about the person that built their house on a firm foundation and the person that built their house on a shaky foundation. Both houses stood until tribulation came along, and then the house that was on a shaky foundation fell. And if you're absolutely 100% dependent on a supply chain that you don't control at all, you can get knocked down. So it's appealing. I understand why, because you're like, oh, I can do it this cheap, but you can get disrupted. So anyway, hopefully we'll get a link to this up in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, go to shaneplays.com, check out the show notes because it's a great read. And I also want to give you a little bit of opportunity here to tell you about, or so you can tell people about how you support veterans. What does Troll Lord Games do to support veterans?
So for veterans, any branch of the service, you get an automatic 50% discount. It doesn't have to be active duty. You can be retired. Just send us, email us at orders@troller.com or product-support@troller.com. And we're just going to ask you a couple of questions. Do not send your DD-214. We're just asking, we get a lot of those, and I don't want any of that.
People prove they're a veteran. They send you their DD-214.
We don't want that out in the open. So, but just shoot us an email. We'll ask a few questions. There's a bunch of veterans. I'm a veteran, so we kind of know what questions to ask. And you get a flat 50% discount. So anything you order from our site, you get the discount.
That's pretty great. So, all right. Well, I got us wrap this up. So good. So much good stuff there's stuff I could have gone down. But hopefully we'll get back on before too long. I'd love to talk about Gary Gygax. I'd love to talk about why the heck do we think that D&D collapsed at 3rd edition? What happened? I'd like to get into all that stuff. That'd be great. Yeah, that's some stuff I've never explored. But always appreciate having you on. Stephen Chenault, a.k.a. Steve Chenault, a.k.a. the Troll Lord of Troll Lord Games. All right, I picked out the bad joke of the week just for you. So here we go. You ready? All right, here we go. You probably heard this one before, but What kind of doctor is Dr. Pepper?
I don't know.
A physician.
Jesus Christ. I have heard that one before. Yes.
Pretty great. What's the thing on there's like a meme that goes around that says, I'd like a Dr. Pepper. You're like, it shows people like at a restaurant and the waitress is like, the person's like, I want a Dr. Pepper. And the waitress is like, is Mr. Pibb okay? And the person's like, is Monopoly money okay?
Yeah, I love that one. Because Mr. Pibb is not Dr. Pepper.
Right. What about Dr. Nut? Remember Dr. Nut back in the 80s?
There was Dr. Thunder.
Yeah, I remember Dr. Thunder. Yeah.
I was on deployment in the Army and I couldn't get Dr. Pepper, so I tried Dr. Thunder. It was not good.
It was not good. I will say, I don't dislike, I will drink a Dr. Pepper. It's not, I'm like, oh, it's all right. I don't dislike it. But I have to say that, Coca-Cola with their, I'd like to teach the world.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, the second best commercial marketing ever for that was, I'm a pepper, you're a pepper. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? That was such a great marketing.
That was a good jingle, but I got to give Coca-Cola. Now, they don't do it anymore for some reason, but Coca-Cola used to show people in cities or in fields, working really hard, and they would take, they'd take that bottle of Coke out of the...
Yeah, and they would look so refreshed.
Yes, you would want a Coke.
Yeah.
That's what, to sell a soft drink, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, no, that was good advertising. Yeah. I don't know if it's still true or not, but for a long time, Coca-Cola was the number one recognized brand worldwide. So
I think it still is.
Yeah,
I think so.
Anyway, all right. Well, man, I appreciate you so much. Hope things...
Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, man. Anytime. Let's get you back on. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep making those great games and following your principles and being successful. I've been really pleased to see all the Control Lord games in the past few years. So
I appreciate all the support you've given us over the years, man, and love being on your show.
Yeah, we'll have you back on. And everybody else, we will catch you next time on Shane Plays Geek Talk. Thanks so much for listening to Shane Plays Geek Talk. I certainly hope you enjoyed this journey into the things we love. For your convenience, show notes with helpful links for each episode can always be found at shaneplays.com. You can catch the podcast in several places, including on the blog at shaneplays.com, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Podbean, Amazon Music, Verbal, YouTube, and more. Shane Plays is also carried on SciFi.radio. SciFi.radio is sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. SciFi.radio. If you like what you hear and would like to support Shane Plays Geek Talk, you can do so for as little as $1 per episode on Patreon at patreon.com/ShanePlays. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Stay geeky, my friends.